Hey everyone, it's the Eclectic Handyman here today talking about how to remove old deck boards, replace them with new ones so they end up looking like this. Let's get it going. All right, so we're going to do this in three different stages. One is the board removal, the second is the joist rehab, and then the third part will be reinstalling the boards. Now, I also want to start by saying, do not be intimidated by this job. If you've never done this before, with a few basic tools, you can do deck board replacement. So just follow the steps along. You might have slight variations, and you'll be able to replace a deck board that's needed. Now, don't worry. I know in this project, you see a bunch of new ones. I'm redoing my deck, but this is for individual deck board replacement as well. Maybe one split, it's gotten old, whatever the reasoning. All right, to remove your old deck boards, you're gonna need some tools. Now, you're gonna have to determine if you have nails or screws. I have nails in my deck board, so I'm going to be using a cat's paw, a crowbar, I may need it, a stud finder magnet, and then obviously the hammer. If you have screws and they're exposed, you can use a power screwdriver to go ahead and remove the old screws. But in this case, in a lot of decks, you're going to have nails. So on the joist line are usually going to be 2 or 3 nails. That's why I like this little stud finder. I have a video, I'll leave a link above, so that if it's been painted over or they're buried and you can't see them, it will help you find the location of it. I have another video on using a cat's paw as well. What we'll do is just go ahead, and there's multiple ways you can do this, but once you know the location, you can just make an imprint, and then you can get the old nail out of there. And depending on how old the nail head is, you may have to get at it a few times from a different direction. And that one was so old that it broke off the head. No worries, I'll show you how to do that one as well. We need to continue down the joist line doing this all over and over like I had mentioned. And there we go. That comes out, you've got the old rusty nails. I recommend having one of these magnetized trays that you can get out the old ones. Let's do another row here. You can get down there, and after a few hits, you should be able to pry it out just like that. You need to repeat this process down the board that you want to remove. All right, once you've got all the nails or screws out, or at least the ones that you know about, this is where maybe the crowbar will come into play. And you can gently, especially if you don't want to mess up the boards next to it, you can very gently start to pry it up. Now, it should come up easily like this if you got everything. If you didn't and it's very stubborn, you can either just try to rip it out by force or go back because you probably missed a nail or a screw. And at this point, you should be able to lift this board out. And then if there are any, again, remaining nails, you would be able to get those out. And if it breaks in part or something like that, no big deal. I think sometimes the ones on the end are a little bit tricky, and I just leave those ones in there. And then once again, depending on the situation, I can just get at it with a crowbar to get remaining nails out, and you could do this in any part. And now we have our old deck board out. Before I get into the joist cleanup and preparation, I want to talk about the old deck boards. I get asked the question a lot, can't I just flip over the deck board and use the old one? I'm going to tell you several reasons why I don't recommend that. First of all, you can tell with this board that I wasn't very cautious with it and I tore it in half. But let's talk about some of the reasons why I wouldn't just flip this over and use this. First of all, it's difficult to see because these have been painted, but the deck boards have a grain pattern that looks like a rainbow. And so you put that up when you install it so that the cupping on the board allows for water runoff. If you turned it over, even when the boards are new, it's technically installed incorrectly for that water runoff. Just the weather and wear over the years. You've got, some fading, cracking, you've got some deterioration. When you look at these 1x6 deck boards, even at their max length of 16 feet, you're looking at a cost of about $20 to replace one deck board. And in that case, for the utmost in integrity, strength, and for deck protection, I would just go with a brand new board. You know, you might have some fractures in it. You've got years of weathering. There's just no real reason I would ever flip a board over unless I had, maybe it was a brand new board, had installed it incorrectly and there were only a couple nails. Maybe I turn it over. But other than that, I do not recommend using old deck boards by just turning them over. The cost is nominal. I would just go ahead again for that utmost in safety and integrity of the deck to replace it with a brand new deck board. All right, so now that the joist is exposed, the next couple of steps are optional, but I highly recommend it. First of all, if you can, just brush off any debris. And next up, if you want, let's just use a little premium outdoor wood filler to go ahead and fill in any holes here. So again, this will only take just a couple of minutes per joist. All right, so I'm doing 2 board replacements here. You probably just have 1. You might have 2 holes or 3 or whatever it is, but just go ahead and fill those holes. And then we'll give this time to dry and we'll sand it. And then we're gonna put on some joist tape. All right, for this next step, what I like to do is hit it with a little 120 grit sandpaper and knock off all this dirt and grime. And of course, even if you don't choose to fill the holes, I think this is still a good step to kind of get your joist cleaned up before we put new boards on them to extend the life of them. And as you can see there, it's really, again, clean this up, bringing a newness back to it before we do this final step here. And the final prep or kind of rehab step that I like to do is to use this deck joist tape. Now this is G tape. I'll leave a link in the description below on getting it. This is 2 inches wide. It fits perfectly on the top of joist. It basically creates this waterproof edge on top, helping to preserve your joist. Now I know you're going to have to do this for each one, so if you're doing a 6-foot replacement or 8, 10, 12 or multiple boards, this is a decision you have to make. The phrase "it's worth its weight in gold" is overused a lot, but I can't tell you for the nominal cost how good this stuff is for the top of the joist. For again, the water will not be able to penetrate from the top through this joist tape. So just measure it out, cut the piece to length. It's very sticky. Some people used to use roofing tape, I believe early on, or as a replacement, but this is specifically made for deck joists. It's very easy to apply. Again, just pretty sticky. Get that position in the middle and then just smooth it out. Push it down the sides. It's best to do this when the joist is dry. If you have any moisture, it is not recommended to put this tape down until your joists have had a chance to dry out a little bit so that it adheres and sticks to it the best. And take a look at that. Now we are ready to put our new board back down in place. All right, so when going to pick out those new deck boards, no matter what length you're getting, right now I'm looking at 16-foot deck boards, you're going to want to take your time and pick out choice boards. Now what we're looking for is you're looking to have not too many knots. You want to make sure there's no splits. You want to take close attention, make sure the forklift hasn't gone over them. There's no real dings in the wood or any knocks out of it. You can be surprised. You really got to go up and down the board. You don't want to just go into that stack and just quickly pick out 5 or 10 or whatever you're looking for. So make sure you go through. Remember, you can always tell the top of the wood by looking at the grain, the rainbow side up. That's the top of the board. So if you've got a couple imperfections that are on the bottom, then you can be less concerned. Maybe use a little wood filler. Make sure to flip the boards over too. You can have the top looking perfect and then you come to the side and you can see right there, this one's all chewed up. So just because they say premium boards doesn't mean they're actually premium. One of the other things I found, so that you can take your time and go through that stack in there, get a helper if you need one, and also if you come at night, be less chance that people get in your way and you can take your time, pick out some of those great deck boards. All right, now that we have the joist prep, we need to go ahead and measure out for our replacement board. Then we're going to take our new piece and head over to either, if you've got a table saw, you can use a circular saw, or in a bind, you could even use a hand saw. As always, remember to measure twice and cut once because we want a tight fit. As a protection step, anytime I make a fresh cut in the wood, I like to put this CopperCoat on. I just use a little foam brush and then get it right there on the end. That'll help preserve the life, again, from any fresh cuts that you make in your pressure treated wood. Now we can take our board that's been cut to size. We have our joists that have been taped, and it's ready to install them. Get it in place, and let's fasten it down. The very final step is to go ahead and nail or secure our board down, our new deck board, with either screws or nails. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time saying which one to use. If you're replacing a single board, then you probably just want to use whatever you already have, whether that be nails or screws. Now, the one thing I am going to talk about is using the correct type of fastener. If you're going to be using screws, which is typically the preferred method, you want to make sure that you have deck screws. Now, these ones happen to be white. They have them in all sorts of different colors, you know, obviously, if it's just going to match whatever you need. But what's nice is that they have this special star bit, and it will help drive in. So if you've got an impact driver, this is probably the most appropriate way to go. But you do not want to just pull any old screws from the house. They need to be exterior deck screws that are made for decking. The one disadvantage of screws is that if you're painting your boards, it is more difficult to remove the screw because you can't see them versus a nail, which you have to just know the general location to pry it out, as we did. If you happen to be using nails, you're probably replacing a single board, a hammer, and you want to make sure that you get galvanized decking nails. These are special coated nails that will prevent rust. Typically, they come in a spiral fashion like this to help grab. Again, you want to get, as these are right here, these are patio and deck nails, 3.5 inch. They also do make similar nails for an air nailer. These happen to be stainless steel spiral shank nails that are probably the most superior type of nail if you're going to be using nails in the deck, as I have right here. But again, whatever you're using, just make sure that you're using what's appropriate for a deck and not finding things like drywall screws or just random nails around the house. Make sure that you get what's right for the longevity of those deck boards. So with pressure treated wood that's wet, you want to get it as close to the old board as possible. You can either use something fancy like this deck bender I have here. I'll leave a link above, but if you're just replacing a couple boards, I wouldn't expect you to use something like that. That draws the board closer. What you ordinarily do are use these like wood shims between the old board and the new, and then you can just hammer a couple of them down. It'll pull the board in, and then ultimately when it dries out, there'll be natural drainage as you need. When you have two boards that butt up against each other like that, try to get the cut as close as possible and then put your fastener, whether you're using screws or nails. Sometimes I like to pre-drill and be a little more gentle on the ends here, but the idea again is that you get them pretty much in the center of the joist and try to go at an angle with whatever type of fastener you're using. Again, you're going to want these things butt up against each other as tight as possible so that when they dry out, you get a natural gap that then allows the water to run through, which is good for the deck. You do not want sitting water. So there you have it. We've replaced our old deck board, and I'm telling you, don't be intimidated by this project. I used to be, but once I got my hands on it, it's not that difficult. If you have a Saturday, from tearing up the old board to buying another one, any joist prep, if you're able to do the taping, to nailing or screwing it down, you can get it done in just a matter of a short period of time. In an upcoming video, I'm going to have painting this with Rust-Oleum 20X, so it adds like a protective armor like these boards behind me. They do recommend that you wait at least 6 weeks for the boards to dry out, whether you're staining it or painting it, but that will add longevity to these boards. Anyway, if you found this helpful, give it a thumbs up. Check out the other videos on the channel, and until next time, this is the Eclectic King again. We'll see you later.